Are you interested in a career in cybersecurity? Are you currently in law enforcement and looking to learn more about technology and cybersecurity? If so, please consider joining us for our master's degree in cybercrime and digital investigation from Michigan State University. Experience a nationally ranked program taught by world-renowned researchers like my two co-hosts on this show and practitioners that can help you play a role in combating cybercrime and advancing justice for victims. This is designed to be completed in as little as 2 years and in a flexible online format that works with your schedule. Visit cj.msu.edu to learn more. We hope you can join us.
Well, welcome to the Crossing the Firewall podcast, everybody. It's good to have you back. My name is Tom Holt. I'm a professor in the School of Criminal Justice here at Michigan State University, and I'm here with my two wonderful co-hosts, as always.
I'm Dr. Rachel McNealey. I'm an assistant professor in the School of Criminal Justice and an associate with the center.
Hi, I'm Dr. Taylor Fisher. I'm also an assistant professor here at MSU, and I also am an associate with the center.
So we have an excellent guest with us today who is like a cybercrime researcher, a podcaster, all-around cyber raconteur. I think it'll make for a really interesting discussion. Today we have Mr. Michael Joyce with us, who's the executive director at the Human-Centric Cybersecurity Partnership at the University of Montreal. Michael, it's great to have you on.
A pleasure.
Yeah, so you wear so many different hats. I know it's kind of trite to begin here, but how did you get into the study of cybercrime to begin with?
Well, I always sort of had an interest in cybersecurity. In a former life, I worked as a building services engineer, designing telecommunications and security for large buildings, and through that job, the need for cybersecurity was something that was important, not something that was really part of the job. I have a background in IT. So it was something that became interesting to me there. And I ended up living in South Korea through many, many steps and stages of personal growth and development, let's say. But I ended up there, and I ended up getting a job at the Korean Institute of Criminology. And they had a program called the Virtual Forum Against Cybercrime, which was something out of the UNODC cybercrime efforts that were going on. And the whole point of that project was to try and help developing countries benefit from the knowledge that had been built up in more developed countries that had more of a history and more academics working on cybercrime. So I really got interested in there, got introduced to the criminology of it in that circumstance. And from there, I guess I was just kind of hooked. It's such an important thing, and coming from a place that's very far away from everything, the internet was always very important to me. So coming and finding a group of people that were doing such interesting work on trying to make the internet a nicer and safer space was really good. So I've been hooked ever since. I've been really interested in cybercrime, cybersecurity ever since that.
And so being the director of the Human-Centric Cybersecurity Partnership, right, I feel like even just in the title, it touches on something we emphasize a lot, which is the human factor in cyber. It's not just machines, it's the interaction of people with the technology. And so through the partnership, is that more aimed at bringing industries together, bringing solutions to the table? What does that look like?
So the Human-Centric Cybersecurity Partnership is another one of the great ideas from Dr. Benoit Dupont. Previous to that group, there was something called the Canada's Smart Cybersecurity Network, the acronym being Serene Risk, and you get points if you can work out how that works. But that sort of developed over time into us recognizing the need for directing interest towards research that was led by human-centric type researchers. So people looking at usable security, sociologists, criminologists, political scientists, psychologists, not obviating technology, including technology in all of the research, but led from that perspective with that kind of basis, that kind of understanding of the importance of that role. So through that, we were able to fund a whole lot of interesting research that might have otherwise fallen through the cracks. I mean, some of the big wins was we picked up some ransomware research that was being done by Dr. Richard Frank that otherwise would have died during the pandemic because of how messed up everything got there. We've done some great stuff on healthcare technology, Dr. Sonia Chiason doing that stuff, Samuel Tanner looking at anti-feminist and misogynistic content online, David Deckery looking at hacker networks and financial crime, developing systems to track them when they're moving across platforms and things like that. Legacy planning for older adults by Elizabeth Stobart. All sorts of stuff that otherwise, if you're just looking from a technical perspective, you might have missed out on, because they're kind of cross-cutting subjects and areas, and they require multidisciplinary teams, interdisciplinary perspectives. So that was sort of the primary aim. How can we create a system for funding all of those things that might otherwise not get funded? And also sort of developing talent as well. So we set up a summer program to help students who are looking at doing this build those kind of skills, build those kind of interdisciplinary skills that are required for turning out those kind of research. So we're really proud of those things. And also we created a MOOC that will hopefully live on long after the Human-Centric Cybersecurity Partnership reaches the end of its government-allotted funding time, so that other people can be sort of upskilled in that kind of multidisciplinary viewpoint on cybersecurity stuff. So that's sort of it in a nutshell, was getting funding, building skills, building programs, building capacities in research that looks at things from the human first.
How does that go over when you're working with all these other stakeholder groups? Because sometimes it seems like these ideas hit well with computer scientists, sometimes they don't. What's been your success rate?
I mean, it's been pretty good. It's been pretty good by having talented researchers from the humanities and other areas leading them. I mean, they really are leading them. So they bring those people along with them. And because of where we are now in terms of the development of understanding more widely with cybersecurity, we find that people from industry and private industry understand now. They sort of get it. And they come to us with problems where they're looking for answers that would only come out of this kind of research. So it's sort of timely in a way, but also it rests on researchers being leaders for their project, really sort of going, this is where I'm going, sort of really espousing their vision, making it clear for all of the other people, and you know, either having them follow or dragging them along, kicking and screaming until the output is realized.
So I'm intrigued because you mentioned your background was in IT, and I was wondering, I know you're interested in phishing and education campaigns related to it and whatnot, but what were some of the things that you took from your IT background? Were there red flags that just consistently popped up that you said, we have to do something about this? But I'm curious how that has kind of informed your research that you're doing now.
Oh, that's kind of an interesting perspective. I'm a absolute geek and nerd and tech head. That's sort of the background. Like, so my first job was systems administrator back in the days of Windows NT, when that was still on things, which is quite a while ago now. So I come from a computing background. That's my world. That's the environment I habituate. I'm probably online more than I am offline, if we are able to make a distinction in that kind of way. So perhaps the things that were interesting for me coming into this area were the assumptions, the ways of talking about online behavior that just didn't make any sense to me. As, I mean, I'm not a digital native, but I was on there from elementary school, way back in sort of the bulletin boards, proto-internet sort of stage. So I have a sort of a way of living on the internet that a lot of the, at least the early papers that were talking about how people conduct themselves online, didn't really seem to gel with. So I guess it might have been that I am the group that wasn't going online occasionally. I was coming offline occasionally, and a lot of the concepts didn't really sort of make sense to me from that perspective.
That's one of the things that I struggle with a bit, because I feel like, boy, I had my finger on the pulse of what was happening in the 2000s and the early 2010s. And the older I'm getting, the more I'm starting to feel a little bit adrift. I can find my way again, but there's just those experiences and those platforms that I don't have. and I won't get that lived experience. My kids are helpful in that respect, but it's still not the same as that tangible, no, I was in this, I know exactly what's going on. And I wonder, can you speak at all to that phenomena a little? I mean, how do you square that with your own experience?
Similar. Look, I can't dance, not for the life of me. So visual medium for socializing like TikTok are completely lost on me. I can't understand that framework. I can see what people are getting out of it, but the idea of communicating using physical gestures and things like that that's not really me. I mean, I guess it's an element of maturing. As you get older, you tend to get away from technology a little bit. I think it was Douglas Adams has a great quote about things that were invented sort of before you were born are natural and a part of the universe. Anything that was invented until you're in your 30s is awesome and everybody should have one. And anything invented after that's unnatural and the work of the devil and should be avoided. So it's kind of that. I don't get Roblox. I don't understand Minecraft. I'm not really into the gaming culture and the sort of extended culture of being online all of the time. So I am drifting away from that. But on the other hand, my understanding of the internet was when the internet was still kind of being constructed. So I understand what's going on underneath the hood a little bit more. I learned to drive stick shift for the internet, if that makes sense. So I perhaps have a different perspective on a lot of the things that are going on from the younger people that I think is probably still valuable, even if I'm not living in exactly that same world that they're living in.
That's really interesting because I think about that in terms of risk, right? When kids grow up with technology, they treat it as natural. They kind of inherently understand the risks just by being a part of it. But trying to communicate those risks to somebody who's post 30 new to technology is incredibly difficult. And so, I know recently there's been a push to educate both at the top end of the ages and the bottom end of the ages. Make sure that your elderly parents have the education that they need and recognize that they didn't come from tech, but then recognize that your kids may know more than you do, but don't understand the risks. And so it's a really interesting time to be alive with this idea of I'm kind of in the middle. I'll admit I'm barely over 30, but it's that weirdness that I know how to be safe on Facebook, but if you threw me in a random Telegram channel or on Roblox or Minecraft, I'm new to it. It's a new environment. So it's really, really interesting.
I think to a certain extent we'll have to recognize the skill sets that younger people have from being exposed to it so much. It's kind of like I don't know if you've heard of the chicken sexing problem. The mechanism by which chickens are often sexed, they're determined to be male or female, is it's a let's put it this way, an analog digital procedure. But they can't really define what it is that they're looking for. It's the kind of thing that is determined with experience. You'll work with an experienced chicken sexer. You'll try and guess the sex. The sexer will tell you yes, no, yes, no, yes, no, and after time you'll get to understand the characteristics instinctively of the thing that makes it either a female chicken or a male. I think with things like AI slop and ingenuine content on the internet, maybe younger people are developing that skill set because of their exposure to it, because of the way that they are in it all of the time and they have other people calling it out for them as they're developing. They may end up with a skill set that we don't have, where they're able to call out fake content or ingenuine content a lot faster than we are, and not be able to explain to us why it is that they just know that that's slop and not real content at all. So yeah, we might have to bow to their wisdom in certain extents, but also explain to them why that's going to be cognitively damaging to them in the long term, because they probably won't have the experience to understand what it's going to do to them in 20 years' time.
Hmm. And there's a big trend among young people, especially, where they're very nihilistic about their risk, right? They assume everything's out there. There's no action that they could take to prevent further harm, even in the face of these to me at least, very clearly escalating harms. And when you and I, Michael, have spoken about your research, you've kind of talked about education as teaching people not to click on things. And so in the context of all of these risks, how effective are efforts to try and do that?
It really depends on what level you're looking at. So, I mean, it's sort of an exciting area. So, hold on to your hats, and I have to first give a shout out and thanks to a cybersecurity phishing simulation education providing company called Beauceron that I've been working with, because they've been absolutely phenomenal. We sort of worked out the ground rules of how we could keep their customers safe in terms of data access, and then at that point they just really let me go at their data to see if I could work out. And it's a fabulous data set. It's about 1 million individuals across Canada, 16 million phishing simulations, not tied to one company or one university or even one industry. It's sort of a great cross-cutting data set that we've been able to use to have a look at what's going on with phishing. So the research that I've been doing has sort of been looking into aspects of phishing and cybersecurity education to try and work out whether there are some structural things that we can do. So the question being, does cybersecurity education work? I can tell you that at a high level it does. So if we talking levels, we're talking at the highest level, the things being done by governments. The Cybersecurity Awareness Month, the thing that happens in October, it's a great enterprise, and it happens, I mean, kind of led by the US, but it happens in a lot of other countries as well. Canada was one of the early adopters. Canadian government does a pretty good job, I have to say, in conducting the campaigns and also measuring their performance as much as they can. They run a regular third-party survey, but it's a survey. So you can only get so much information about surveys. And surveys don't really tell us anything about behavior. People can tell you what they think they did. They can report what they remember that they did. But with things like clicking on something, one time, once in a year, it's really hard for that to be accurate. So, I mean, there's been some great work on these kinds of campaigns. You have to look at the stuff from the UK with Lynn Coventry, Maria Barda. Wonderful stuff. Ruth Schiller there in the US, Tommy Van Steen in Europe, all doing wonderful things for these national level campaigns, looking at what can be done, whether they can be driven towards behavior. But there's not really any sort of evidence about whether they work or not. So that's one of the things that we tried to find out with this great data set that we have. So what we did was we looked at first, do the campaigns change what the organizations do? So I can tell you that in October, during Cybersecurity Awareness Month, companies send 10 to 12% more phishing simulations. Okay, so they increase the number of phishing simulations that they send out, which is, I mean, that's a definite indication of something happening. So you can pick your theoretical hat. I know you've got a lot of them, Tom. Maybe put your routine activities one on for a moment. This is your super controller influencing your place management controller here, having an impact on what people are doing in the place of cybercrime. So this seems to do something. So at the national level, those campaigns do something. They change how organizers act. It also has an impact on individuals. So there's a 10% reduction in people actually clicking on phishing simulations during that month, which shows that, again, this change in focus on cybersecurity, that awareness campaign, does do something. It changes the likelihood of people clicking on phishing emails. I mean, again, pick your hat, Tom, but it's having an impact. And well, what are we going to call this? We're going to call this a target exhibiting greater inertia, therefore being a less attractive target. We can call it that. So it's having an impact on people's likelihood of clicking, which is a good thing. So it does something at that level. We also see an increase in reports of actual phishing. So outside of the simulations, the number of actual phishing emails increased by about sort of 6%, depending on the year, sort of 6-10%. That's good as well. So we're seeing that simulated behavior is translating into something a little bit more real, if that is the case. So not just simulated emails are being reported, the real emails are being reported as well. So that's another great impact of those national level campaigns, sort of creating a focus on cybersecurity awareness and resulting in a change in activities around phishing. An interesting thing, though, the reporting of phishing simulations drops by about 6% during that time. That one we're not entirely sure of. It could be that they're able to tell that these are phishing simulations from their company and they've just had enough of it. Because there's more of them during that time, it might be an indicator of some kind of cybersecurity fatigue that's happening at that point. They're less likely to act in a sort of a benevolent way towards their company to let other people know about it. That could be the case. So we're not entirely sure what that's about. So at a national level, yeah, they work. At an individual level, without wanting to waffle on too long, we were able to map out what we would call a skills degradation curve. So the time between receiving a training and receiving a phishing simulation email, the longer that time is, the greater the likelihood of clicking on the phishing email. We see an inverse relationship with reporting the phishing email as well. So on the day that you do your training, there is somewhere around a 3% likelihood of you clicking on a phishing email. That is what we're going to call the shit happens number. Accidents happen. We can't ever be perfect. There's around a 3% chance of you clicking on it just after you finish your training or within the first 24 hours. Over time, that likelihood increases. So it has a gentle curve that sort of works its way up. But if we look at in a year's time, there's almost no impact of you having had that training. You're somewhere over 90% in terms of the likelihood of clicking on that phishing. So for the people who do click on phishing, because we can't measure the people who didn't click, we've got no data points, but for the people who do click on phishing, there is a change in their capacity, which means that the training must have done something. Otherwise, it would just be no impact of it. So that's a very long way of saying, yes, it works. It does do something. Where it is directed at behavior, we can show that there is some impact on behavior of those phishing programs. It's not to say that they're perfect, but they do something.
So from my time simulating smishing attacks, there's kind of two red flags that pop up from it. One is that from a research perspective, it's incredibly difficult if you don't have that organizational support, right? So I know at USF, my previous school, IT has the ability to send out simulated attacks to the student body, right? And so if you're working with those organizations, it's a lot easier to engage in those kind of attacks. But the other red flag that I've really noticed is that without that company or organizational component, the education almost doesn't exist, right? It's dependent on how you build your project or if you include it or not. But what's come to my mind is that a lot of the cybersecurity education that individuals are getting are coming from their workplace, right? It's coming from where I'm employed. I have an email address that is their domain, and therefore I am responsible for XYZ. And so I wonder, have you seen anything or thought about how does that cross into individual behavior, right? If there is some success, right, to phishing simulations and the education that comes with them, is that something that we can assume will spill over into their personal life, where their personal email, they are still looking for phishing things? I haven't really found a way to analyze that or to really get at it, but I'm curious your thoughts.
Anecdotally, yes. From talking with people in industry, and this was something that came to a head when we had to do that rushed transition to the pandemic. It seems like there's an overflow between people's workplace practices and their personal practices. And at the start of the pandemic, there was sort of a problematic backflow with people going to their house and then having their home practices affect their work practices. So anecdotally, there is. But there isn't really any good evidence as to how much there is or to what extent. And I'm not entirely sure how you would do that. You might have to do vignettes or very small studies to try and capture the interplay between people's work behaviors and their home behaviors. But we can assume to a certain extent that people who learn self-protective behaviors would just carry those self-protective behaviors with them, where they're not specifically tailored towards their work environment. I mean, I'm not sure people would make the investment in their home if they had a VPN and things like that they were using at work. But the practices about, not clicking on things or instinctively reporting stuff, where it's not a complicated cognitive process in order to do that, you would assume that they would instinctively do that. I mean, it's like when you American people pick up a cricket bat. You swing it like it's a baseball bat. So you can assume that there's some skills transfer that comes from one place to another, although I haven't really seen any good studies to demonstrate exactly to what extent that is.
Now I'm trying to imagine how else one would swing a bat-shaped object. I've never watched cricket.
Don't start now. You're going to lose so many weekends.
Fair.
So you've got a really interesting career, not only in terms of the work that you're doing in terms of research, but also in your podcasting career. Can you tell us a little bit about Cybercrimeology, your podcast?
Yeah, so the podcast started as a way of trying to bring hallway conversations to people who weren't brave enough to talk to people in the hallways of conferences. I have, through the work that I've been doing, had the opportunity to attend many conferences, and over time I got over my introverted self and built up the courage to go and chat to people in the corridor and go and talk to them in cafes and make my way to the bar after the presentations. And I discovered that that's where they really come alive. That's where the exciting science is happening. Most academic conferences and all conferences to a certain extent, it's a performative practice, and the boxes that people are put into for discussing their research really very restrictive. So you have enthusiastic, dynamic personalities who are slavishly trying to fit introduction, method, results, limitations, conclusions within a tiny little presentation space that they have. And you don't really hear the excitement of the research in that. But if you talk to them in the cafe afterwards, you hear not only the bits that were exciting, the stuff that didn't work, the other things that they tried, the things they learnt along the way, their real excitement for the subject area, and whether they're passionate to keep going. So there's a lot of really invigorating conversations that are just hard to access if you're a little bit shy. So the idea was to take advantage of the fact that the podcasts are a very intimate way of accessing information, and bring those conversations to people in a very safe space, just between their headphones. So that was the idea, and over time it's sort of developed into a place where we can talk about the geeky parts of research, the practices of being a researcher, the problems that academics face. We've had, I mean, not only have we had some really wonderful guests to talk about some super exciting research, but we've also been able to talk about the history of different fields, problems such as paper mills that academics are facing now in terms of getting their research published. So it's just become a nice space for people to talk about all of the other things around cybercrime research, and I'm really trying to build it into a reference library for people who are enjoying the practice of studying cybercrime or cybersecurity, and they want to listen to those people, have the names jump off of the page. And between just us, I am terrible at remembering the names of authors. So if I have a chat with them and they become real people to me, it's more likely that I'm going to be able to remember their names and put them in the appropriate place in the paper that I'm tiredly writing.
That's a smart strategy. A very work-intensive strategy. I'll give it to you. And you've been doing that for about 6 years. Is that how old the show is, would you say?
Yeah, yeah. So, I mean, pulling back the curtain a little bit, it started at the start of 2019, but only started being published at the end of 2019. So I gave myself an 8-month run-up, which was good because I screwed some things up when I was first recording some of the episodes and needed to do some stuff again. But yeah, so I made sure I had enough recordings up the sleeve to make sure it was a going concern before I got it started. But I mean, we managed to start. And I say we because it's really a collaboration between myself and the people who come on, but we managed to start just before the pandemic. So we started November 2019, not knowing what was coming up, but yeah, that's when things sort of kicked off.
So, in the time that you've been doing the show, have you noticed any trends in what people bring up as concerns? Or, because as an example, in our very young show, something that I think is a theme across pretty much everyone we talk to is trying to emphasize the persistence of human behavior, right? Yes, technology can be overwhelming, it can be very technical, but at the end of the day, it's people. So, very early days, I'd say that's our prevailing theme. Have you seen any emerge and change in your time doing the show?
I mean, it's hard to say if there's a particular theme because I've tried to do my best to not be locked into too many boxes. So I've tried to jump around as much as possible to make it as generally specific to cybercrime and cybersecurity. So it's hard to think of a theme, but what I can talk about is maybe sort of a progression of research over time because it's been going for sort of 5-6 years. I don't know if you ever read Merton's essay on how science works, but I think we might be moving out of what he called universalism, which is where everybody sort of has their own preconceived notions of things and you're having to fight against them, to not quite communism, where we built our own little community of cybercrime research. I think we're sort of somewhere in the middle of that because, I mean, no one really cares about the wine or the bottles anymore. I get the impression that that's gone. No one is arguing for the existence of this or having debates about what stuff we need to bring from traditional aspects of criminology into cybercrime anymore. So that sort of positioning or justification of the field of cybercrime research against other fields of we're past that, which is great. So we're not really doing that kind of stuff anymore. We're not really just sort of defining this. Oh, geez, this is a problem. Like we're past that. We're moving on to sort of doing empirical work with an intent to get some value out of it. So there's value-oriented empirical work. There's people diving into productive niches, more detailed stuff, getting further into the weeds and working with people outside of the academic community, like law enforcement, to try and drive actual changes. So I think that's something that's come along. The research is sort of matured in the way that it's not so self-conscious about whether it should exist anymore, and now getting onto the job of actually trying to do some benefit in the world. So there's a lot of sort of really interesting work. I mean, I don't want to name names because the ones I forget will, worry about why I forgot them. But there's so many interesting things that people are doing where they're actually drilling into important aspects of, are we measuring things correctly? Are the programs that are being developed out of the work that we're doing actually making positive change? There's a really, really good, important, and sort of niche kinds of things. So I think if we're going to think of cybercrimeology as a group of people, we're getting to a good stage. But I also think we're probably at a point now where we need to take a moment and think about where we fit into all of the other work that's being done, because I think we have a little bit of a responsibility. So the way I think of criminology, it's the study of like problematic or harmful behavior, right? It's the study of deviant behavior. It's not just the study of crime. At least that's the way I had it explained to me, that not just the study of crime, it's the study of deviant behavior. And cybersecurity is largely concerned, or cyber safety, if we think about it, an expanded version of the term, is largely about thinking about the kinds of behavior that are deviant and harmful. So criminology has got about 200 years of background of looking at deviant behavior, which is kind of a specialist area. And we can bring all of that wealth of knowledge to the study of cybercrime, cybersecurity. And the reason that I think this is important is because criminology has the scars to show for all of the mistakes that it's made over time. Over 200 years, you develop your rudder technology, you develop better guidelines. And as an institution, as a group with institutional knowledge, we carry battle scars. We have the baggage of Lombroso, Goddard, the tea room trade. We've all of these lessons that we've learned in terms of ethics and how to deal with problematic research paths and dealing with sensitive user groups. And I think that knowledge that we have extends past ticking some boxes to get IRB approval and resting on how robust our methods are. And I think that some of the younger fields, and I'm thinking of things like computer science and maybe cybersecurity research, the cybersecurity researchers that do great work in industry, they can learn a lot from criminologists in how to potentially avoid some unanticipated forms of harm that comes out of doing research of this type. And it would be lovely if they would take the opportunity, if they would realize that they can just have a quick conversation with someone from a criminology background before they throw that preprint online, because it could really save somebody from being hurt later on in a way that they didn't anticipate. So I think criminologists are perhaps at a point now where we are comfortable enough in that we have a field of cybercrime research that we should be taking all of those lessons and making sure that other people benefit from them before they have their own highly problematic event that they're going to have to get scarred up from. So I think that's one thing, and I think also from talking to people, it would also be nice if those kinds of arrangements were facilitated by having some more interdisciplinary journals for them to publish in, because at the moment it's a little bit hard for them to find places. It seems like they can meet people. Social scientists have worked out how to communicate with computer scientists, which was a battle that had to be. So we've got a common language. We've gotten there. We've worked that out. Apparently, people are even getting funding fairly easily for the types of works that they need to do, which is it's another thing. I mean, that depends on where you are in the world. But they're really sort of struggling to find good places to get them published because it doesn't fit in anybody's particular way of publishing or way of writing or themes that they're used to. And I think that if they don't have enough legitimate journals that are being steered by experienced researchers, it's going to leave more space for what does Jerry Ratcliffe call it? The Bangladeshi Journal of Sheep Stealing and Criminology. There's going to be more places for journals like that people are going to have to look to because there's nowhere else to get their valuable research actually out there. So I think there's a couple of things. We're coming along as a group. I think we're maturing, but I think it's a time for us to maybe take that experience and that confidence that we now have and help apply it to all of the other fields that are doing great work with regards to cybercrime and cybersecurity.
Well, on that note, I know Rachel and I have faced a number of desk rejects recently, so I feel that, right? There are journals, that just say, oh, this isn't fit, this isn't us, this isn't whatever. And it's like, well, it's science, it belongs somewhere, right? And it's so hard. But I actually want to take back to something you mentioned a little bit before that, was the relationship between kind of us as academics and the practitioners of the world, the law enforcement agencies, the social service agencies. And I know you on your podcast have had a lot of practitioners on and have had those kind of discussions. So I wonder, how has that experience been in kind of bridging the gap and kind of creating that common language like you spoke about with the computer scientists, but with the non-academics of the world, the people that don't care if you publish your paper, they don't care if it lands in criminology, right? They don't care about that stuff. So how have you been able to kind of bridge that gap, and has the podcast been a tool or an avenue for that?
I mean, it's a difficult thing. It's a difficult thing to speak with an academic voice and be listened to by people from outside of that world, because when it comes to things like cybercrime and the related cybersecurity, there is an industry as well. And the people from industry, they deal in certainties, and academics deal in probabilities of truth. So when you're talking as an academic and you say it's probably true that, or we believe it to be the case, or we have evidence to support the proposition that, and the other person who's also talking is saying it is definitely the case 100% of the time, absolutely, it's a little bit harder to cut through on those levels and deal with people who are trying to make decisions and trying to find the best source of information for those decisions. And I mean, as academics, we have to keep working, we have to keep doing this, because there are industries out there that are really in need of firm evidence to base their solutions on, base their practices on. So we really need to keep doing the work, but it is a struggle to get across. And I mean, I have a particular cross to bear when it comes to cybersecurity education and the industries that are being developed around them, because they are, I mean, they're fairly nascent, depending on how old you are and how long you've been looking at cybersecurity. It's a fairly young industry, and at least in my opinion, cybersecurity education is still at the stage where I could fairly confidently say it's a lemons market. The people buying the solutions can't tell the difference between a good solution and a bad solution. They don't have the equipment to do that. There's no way for them to properly evaluate it. And the problem with the lemons market is that it favors the vendors that aren't doing research and development. If you have low overheads and you can sell your product more cheaply because you're not investing in making sure it actually works, then you are much, much more likely to be successful in a market when you're competing against people who do have to spend all of that money. So that's a real problem that I think we need to sort of work on, and I think that we can help as academics to try and establish some sort of metrics, some sort of tools to help the general consumer distinguish between solutions that are rigorously developed, that are, scientific in how they applied and are evolving with the work that academics are doing. It would be great if they could tell those apart from the sort of hold my beer developer approaches to putting things out there, because it can be very hard to tell. They look just as polished when you're just looking at their websites and things. I would like it if the people in the industry who are making decisions, the CISOs and the people out there, have a little bit more patience and tolerance, because it can seem a little bit from the outside that in terms of looking at technical solutions to cybersecurity, they're very comfortable with each of those solution types that they have not being 100% effective. They're kind of happy to have a layering of firewall, zero trust network, next gen firewall, MFA, PAM, SSE, EDR, WAF, all of those things built on top of each other to make their cybersecurity stack, and they see their job as coordinating them all underneath a cybersecurity strategy. And they're super fine with that. That's the way. Each one of those by themselves is not going to be 100% effective, but if you layer it in a certain way, and that's the way they understand their position. But when it comes to cybersecurity education, the training either works or it doesn't, and if it doesn't, they want to kick it to the curb and complain that they shouldn't be investing in it. But I really think that they need to take the same sort of approach and start layering these things together. So education, awareness, training, and I see those as completely separate things. User experience design, human-in-the-loop systems, incentive structures, role definitions, user experience design, cybersecurity, culture change, have that as the layered stack for the human-centric element within their organizations. It makes sense. It operates in the same sort of way that they used to. I just wish they would have the patience to allow the human stack for cybersecurity to be layered and operate in the same way that their technical controls do.
I find that really interesting because this semester I'm teaching a cyber policy course, and so much of the legislature or the statutes that are impacting people, at least here in the US, are good faith efforts. You at least tried to protect your consumers, and that seems to be good enough to protect you from legal backlash, at least in certain circumstances. And so to think that they're just layering on these tools that they really don't have any knowledge of, or whether or not they're impactful, at least they made an effort, right? And so it's like, as long as the liability's off the table, I'm happy with it. But I think, like you said, we're switching into this world where that's not going to be acceptable anymore, right? We're going to have to start looking at who's doing the research, who's doing the evaluations. And it's so incredibly difficult because our policies are so behind, our procedures are so behind, and trying to get anyone to adopt new tech is hard enough. So it's a really tricky spot where it's kind of like the perfect storm of why bad stuff happens, right? It's because nobody's really holding each other accountable or caring, right? Maybe where they should.
Yeah, it's a good point. I mean, the aspect of human in cyber makes it really easy for finger pointing when it comes to who is responsible. You can say, oh, well, humans are the weakest link. Therefore, all of the efforts we made to control cybersecurity around them failed because they are weak. And then from the point of the view of the weak person, myself being one of them, if we're going to call humans weak, it's not my job. It's not my job to do cybersecurity. No one's paying me to do that. I have other stuff that I'm getting paid for. There's somebody with a job that's called IT security, and they're getting paid to do that. So, not my job. I'm going to focus on the things that I am getting paid to do. So, for each of those groups, it's very easy to sort of proxy control of that aspect of cybersecurity off to someone else, and in the end, it ends up on the floor, and no one's looking after it until a phish happens, and then the game of resilience begins, if we're going to call that game that.
I wonder, since you mentioned the scars of research and stuff like the tea room trade, is it fair to argue that research on phishing that uses deception is safer than, say, the tea room trade or some other studies, or are phishing scams, even if they're performed by researchers, potentially unethical due to that lack of disclosure? I mean, I know I'm asking a provocative question just for the sake of doing so, but I'm curious to hear your thoughts.
I think it matters why you're doing it, and there's two groups to cut out separately that we should talk about in different terms. First is the participants during the study. Second is the participants after the study, and third is the wider society afterwards. During the study, if you are doing it as part of the normal education program, if you see it as assessment and you are feeding information back in a kind and compassionate way to help them improve themselves and add to their capacity as a human and a part of the organization, I think that's overwhelmingly a positive thing. If you view them as a simulation, as in a flight simulation that pilots do thousands of hours at to make sure that they are good at flying a plane before they put people in the back of it and see how they go, then also that's a good thing. You're building skills there. So I think if that's how you're approaching it in those two aspects, that's very good. If you're doing it in a punitive way, then I don't think that's necessarily positive, because you are emotionally, at the very least, making that person's day more difficult. So I think that's the first group. I think if done in the right spirit and in the right way, it's overwhelmingly a positive thing. Talking about them afterwards, it depends how you publish. So if you publish, here are the specific phishes that caused problems for our community. Our particular, let's say you're doing it in a university environment, our particular university is particularly susceptible to these phishes. Here is a list. Here's the top 10. You can phish everybody in this university more effectively if you use this phish rather than the other type of phish. I think you need to be a little bit careful there, because you're potentially creating a roadmap. If they are able to work out the organization that you're looking at, then you could be creating a localized source of harm there if someone decides that that's a target that they want to point a finger at. In terms of society overall, we need to identify the problem areas for people so that we can start developing solutions for them. So again, it sort of becomes positive again if you go, well, people in generally really suck when you send them a fish that says your package didn't arrive. Uh, maybe that's something we're not good at, and we need to sort of understand as a group we suck at those things, and we need to legislate so that package delivery companies never include any links in those kinds of emails. It always says your package didn't come, go to the website, and there's no links from legitimate companies, so that we can tell people generally your package email will never contain a link, your package SMS will never contain a link, and people can understand that if there is a link, that's a red flag. So it depends on the level that you're looking at. So yeah, keeping phishing, the lessons that we learned from things like the tea room, and applying it to stuff like phishing, we have a responsibility after publishing to see what can happen with that research. And I think it really matters depending on the levels and layers that you're looking at it at. I mean, every study's going to be different, but I think at least doing the exercise, not just being happy that you convinced or bamboozled your ethics board. You know, I don't want to make out that anybody's doing anything unethical, but you know, if you just tick the boxes and go through without doing those sort of wider thoughts about exactly what can happen beyond the point where it's outside of the control of those instruments, then I think you might be lacking something. And those are the kinds of things that lessons we can bring from the past into the present.
That brings up a really interesting point because I myself have had to have these exact conversations of how are we going to manage this deception, right? And I personally have always embedded education, even if it comes after the deception, even if it comes, later, as long as I'm educating them and providing them resources, I can sit with it. But I think what it brings up is a really interesting question about the role of IRBs, because I'm also the person that had to walk into the room and explain Bitcoin to them. So it's a really interesting time where you have social science researchers who may not be in the cyber world making determinations about technology that they may not understand. And so the role of the IRB has become really interesting because how much of it is me educating them and convincing them that this is ethical versus their true review of it to determine if it fits into the larger ethical principles that they hold. And so I know personally it's been an uphill battle in those ways. Anytime you put an IRB in with deception, they're like, whoa, 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 why are you lying to people, But I've always found that as long as you embed education, they're okay with it. And then, you really have to be aware of, do they even understand what we're talking about? Because I don't want to be in a position where after the study's done, somebody said I was mistreated and the IRB says, oh, we didn't think about that, right? That would be worst case scenario. So it's a really tough spot to be in. But I think, like you said, we as researchers just have the responsibility to do it in a way that is truly scientific and for the betterment of, the populations that it impacts later. But I know I've had this exact conversation with many people because they read my dissertation and say, you sent phishing messages to people? And I said, yeah, I did. IRB said it was cool, So it's an interesting conversation, and outside academia, they do not understand it. But I certainly think IRBs and their role in all this is going to change over the next 5-10 years, I would imagine, if it hasn't already.
Yeah, it's a sticky subject. I mean, they do a great job, and it's a hard job that they do. So, I mean, full credit to the ethicists working at universities and the researchers serving on those positions. I mean, it's not like they get paid extra for doing it. So, it's a really hard job, and their commitment to doing that kind of thing is really important. That said, though, I mean, I remember, Tom, about 15 years ago, you asked me a question of whether something was ethical, and this was in the newsletter for the Virtual Forum Against Cybercrime. You asked me if something that we'd put in there was ethical, and I am unfortunately a victim to falling down rabbit holes quite often. So I tried to work out what you meant by that, and that led to quite a dive into some very large books, the APA Guide to Ethics, reading as much as I could to try and work out what the standard for ethics was for that kind of thing. And there really isn't any, and there's not really any sort of system for transparently communicating what the process is for deciding on the ethics. It really sort of depends on individual boards, the people who make them up. And I think that this does create a little bit of a problem in the modern version of academia, where there are so many universities, so many people working on these different things, and as a result, so many different ethics boards. The researchers really are at the mercy of where their institution's ethics board are, and it means that some opportunities don't come up at all universities, so it's not really a level playing field in terms of which research gets commissioned and which research doesn't, because of this system of doing ethics that makes it hard to communicate transparency where the ball should fall, if we use another sporting analogy. I think it's a difficult thing to institute. I don't have a solution for it, but I can point out the problems that I see at the moment, where some universities may not understand some kinds of research that is proposed, and it may not go forth at that university, whereas it would at a different university, which sort of that signals a kind of a problem, and I don't have a solution, and I'm quite happy in not having any sort of solution there, because it's for brighter minds and more experienced people than me to work out better ways of doing that. Bill Hader said in an interview once, when people look at your material, listen carefully to when they tell you there's a problem, but then ignore them absolutely when they try to tell you how to fix it, because what do they know? So I'm just going to point out the problems that I see. There's some certain issues, but I'm 100% aware that I'm not qualified enough to suggest any kind of solutions for them.
Well, let me just say, one, sorry for giving you such an interminable headache for something that I don't fully remember anymore. So that's bad. But secondly, I think you're spot on, and it goes to the point that you made earlier. I think you said, I learned how to use the internet with a stick shift or something to that effect. And it's really true even now. I think we have so many academics, as you said, but that functional understanding of the internet or the technologies that undergird it aren't necessarily there, even across the board. And so as a result, that educational component is really on us as researchers to communicate it to those IRBs, to our colleagues, so that way there's a fundamental understanding. I'm sure we've all been made aware by our colleagues that I don't understand cyber, I don't need to because you're here now. It's like, no, that's not it. So I agree with everything you've said.
And so we usually close up by asking our guests kind of what you would want a major takeaway to be. If you had to boil your perspective and your knowledge down to one takeaway for the audience, whether that's about the field or the problem or solutions, what would that be for you?
I'm not sure I can impart a thought to people, but maybe I can impart an act. There was a really cool paper that came up at a conference called SOUPS. Like, I'm showing my age. It's like 2014 or something like that. But it was on what good is it just to talk about cybersecurity. That was the name of the paper. And it turns out that water cooler talk has an impact on people's responsiveness and their attitudes around cybersecurity. So rather than a thought, I'd encourage people to just talk to the people around you about cybercrime. Talk to them about fraud, talk to them about ransomware, talk to them about phishing, talk about crime. Even if you think the person you're talking to knows more than you, talk about it anyway, because talking about it changes the normative value for your social group of what fraud and crime online is. If crime experience is something that we all talk about, then people will come to you with their stories and you'll go to them with your stories, and it won't seem like an abnormal thing to do. And you'll be able to gauge your level of suspicion against theirs as well. And you would be surprised the number of cons that just don't work if you discuss them with a third party before making a decision. The leveraging of time, the framing of problems, all of those things just sort of fall away when you go, yeah, look, I'll get back to you and I'll talk to someone else first. You know what I mean? I mean, if you just make it a general rule of never sending a penny across the internet until you chat with someone first, I mean, if that person is in a relationship with you, that's going to be great for your relationship for a start. But you know, if it is a T-shirt or shoes or a puppy, or maybe Tom wants to send me some cash, or I met someone online, Valentine's Day is coming up, whatever it is, having a chat with a live person before clicking purchase is really going to have an impact on your ability to properly process what that thing is. And if it is suspicious, then maybe just explaining what you're trying to do to that person will reveal to you all of the problems in it. The premise or the pretext for the con might just fall apart within a few questions. And because they're coming from an entirely different perspective, they weren't exposed to all of the things that led up to you getting to that point. They might be able to tell you if it smells or not. So have the conversation. It helps keep everyone on your toes, even if it means nothing. It helps you. It helps them. We tend to forget. We get wrapped up in what we're doing and the issues and the wants and desires and needs and the people around you. They care for you. It's a great Spanish word. You're all from America. It's a great Spanish word called cariño, which is that care that you feel, the warmth and care for people around you. Everybody has so much of that, and even if you disagree about what you're talking to them about, they'll still care for you afterwards. So don't underestimate the value of the social. Don't underestimate the value of the care that people feel for you, and make use of it. So I guess the thought is, your individual failures as a human are mitigated by the successes of your community. I mean, the vice versa is true as well. But don't forget to make use and contribute to your community in the battle against cybercrime.
So to that end, can you tell our listeners where they can find your podcast, how often it comes out? Let's have a plug for you.
Awesome. So cybercrimeology.com. It comes out on the 1st of every month. We have some really cool episodes coming up. I'm not going to tease what they are, but trust me, they're exciting. And I encourage everybody to dig into the back history as well. Whatever you're interested in, I have 125 episodes there already. I'm sure there is one that you're going to enjoy.
And other academics may do this already, but I certainly use your podcast for my classes. I think it's a good, approachable way for students to get some additional content, especially if they're not big on reading. It at least gets them some of the bigger picture ideas in a way that'll hopefully connect with them in a way that works. So I think your podcast is great. It's really, really helpful for a lot of different purposes, even just that general understanding point that you mentioned earlier. So yes, please give it a listen. I think it's great. So thank you so much for joining us. This was a really good conversation. I'm glad we got to have it. We'd love to have you back on again if you want to talk more about your phishing research, or even just have a general, hey, what's the state of the cybercrime podcast? That would be a fun discussion to have too.
Awesome. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah, thank you so much. And thanks everybody for joining us, and we look forward to having you with us the next time we cross the firewall.
Thanks for listening to the Crossing the Firewall podcast. This is a production of the Center for Cybercrime Investigation and Training in the School of Criminal Justice at Michigan State University, produced by J.J. Thomas. The thoughts and opinions expressed are those of the hosts and the guests and do not necessarily reflect those of the university. If you have a comment or a question about the show, please email us at crossingthefirewall@gmail.com. Also, make sure that you follow us on Instagram and LinkedIn for more information. And if you're enjoying us on your favorite podcast app, please make sure that you like the show and leave us a review so that way everybody knows what we're up to. And if you're listening in on YouTube, make sure that you like us and subscribe so that way you're staying up to date on everything that is crossing the firewall.